There's a symbol we use every day, but almost no one has wondered where it came from: the question mark. And even stranger, why do we have to put it at the beginning of the sentence in Spanish as well? Who decided that a question should begin with that inverted sign? The same thing happens with the exclamation mark, but behind it, there are medieval manuscripts, monks who transcribed texts, academies that made decisions, and a much more curious story than you can imagine, which you will discover next. The story of the question mark and exclamation mark doesn't start as a tale of whimsical drawings, but as a necessity for reading. Before these marks existed, ancient texts were read with far fewer visual aids than we have today. The reader had to reconstruct pauses, tones, emphasis, and meaning. That's why punctuation was born as a silent technology, a way of telling the eye how the voice should sound when reading. First, a methodological caveat. There is no single straight line from antiquity to our current punctuation marks. Cultures wrote questions in different ways, and some marks functionally resembled our question marks without being their direct ancestor. One of the earliest pieces of evidence appears in Syriac biblical manuscripts. The specialist J.F. Coakley studied the Saga Elijah, a double dot mark placed over a word near the beginning of certain phrases used to indicate ambiguous yes or no questions. The University of Cambridge summarizes that this Syriac sign is documented before the Greek and Latin question marks, whose oldest examples appear around the 8th century. But this should be studied carefully. This does not prove that our question mark comes from Syriac. It proves that the problem of marking questions had already been solved independently in that written tradition. The most widely accepted ancestor of the Western question mark is the punctus interrogativus, associated with the Carolingian world. It was not born in a modern country, but in the cultural space of the Carolingian Empire, among monasteries and scriptoria linked to the intellectual reform of Charlemagne. Paleographer Jean Vincent recorded early manuscript examples from Corbie during the abbacies of Mauvaise and Godescalc, the latter copied for Charlemagne, and also in the Godescalc Gospel copied for Charlemagne. There, signs with a zigzag shape or slanted stroke can be seen, not identical to the modern question mark, but Carolingian in origin, but with a nascent and innovative function. From there, the sign began to change shape. In the medieval Latin tradition, the interrupted punctus interrogativus was one of the positura signs, that is, marks that help to close the meaning of a sentence and guide the reading. A Unicode technical report based on paleographic bibliography such as Parquet's explicitly identifies the punctus interrogativus as the origin of the modern question mark and its inverted form. It also notes that the vertical form we recognize today became stabilized much later, around the end of the 15th century.
Sí.
Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to this channel and turn on the notification bell to remind you when there's a new video. The exclamation mark, on the other hand, has followed a different path. For a long time, the same question mark could also be used to indicate a raised or emphatic intonation. The Royal Spanish Academy reminds us that the punctus interrogativus was originally a simple sign that marked the end of both interrogative and exclamatory sentences. But the exclamation mark as such came later. The so-called signus admirativus, or exclamativus, was developed among Italian humanists in the 14th century, That's why, if we're looking for an approximate birthplace of the exclamation mark, the most reasonable answer is late medieval humanist Italy, not ancient Rome, or a popular invention without documentation. Here, two appealing but weak legends circulate. One says that the question mark was born from writing the word question, abbreviated as QQO, with the Q above the O. Another says that the exclamation mark comes from writing the Latin exclamation IO, placing the I above the O. These are very commonly repeated hypotheses in popular science, but strong paleographic evidence actually points more to the development of medieval handwritten signs, not just a simple graphic fusion of letters. Even current editorial sources present the IO explanation as a theory, not as a certainty. The explanation of these signs is better understood if we trace them through books. First, they circulated through manuscripts. This remains a theory, not a certainty. Then reached medieval universities, and later with the printing press, the signs became standardized in the European languages that used the Latin alphabet. Spain received them within that European tradition. Golden Age orthographers used the closing question mark as well as the closing exclamation mark. It began to appear in Spanish treatises from the early 17th century, although it could still be confused with the question mark. The Spanish case is exceptional for another reason. It not only uses closing marks, but also opening marks. But why? The answer follows a grammatical logic because in Spanish, many questions can't be identified from the first word. In English, for example, "Are you coming?" signals that it's a question from the opening auxiliary. In Spanish, a sentence like, "Tomorrow after the meeting with the teachers and the students, are we going to review the report?" can force the reader to realize too late that the whole sentence should have been read as a question. The Spanish solution was to mark from the beginning where the question or exclamation starts. When did it happen? The main normative evidence points to 1754. The RAE indicates that the Academy's orthography of that year introduced the opening question and exclamation marks as a peculiarity of the Spanish system. In addition, the bibliographic record of the Miguel de Cervantes Virtual Library confirms the addition of the orthography of the Castilian language, published in Madrid in 1754 by the Royal Spanish Academy. But there's an important nuance. At first, it wasn't an absolute requirement for every brief question. Manuel Peñalver Castillo's research on the orthography handbook shows that in the 1741 orthography only the final punctuation marks appeared, whereas the initial punctuation marks were already present in the second edition of 1754, although at first they were mainly used for long sentences. And who decided that? There is no solid evidence to attribute it to a single named individual. The most responsible thing to say is that it was an institutional decision by the Royal. The Spanish Academy, founded in Madrid in 1713 and determined, was dedicated from its early decades to setting rules for the written use of Castilian. Today the rule is clear. In Spanish, the question and exclamation marks are double signs, and omitting the opening mark is considered incorrect in standard writing. In conclusion, the question mark did not come from a single isolated idea, but from centuries of reading manuscripts, from the effort to turn intonation into a visible form. The exclamation mark appeared later in the expressive environment of the Italian humanists, and Spanish in the 18th century took its own path. It decided that the reader shouldn't have to wait until the end to know how to read a sentence. That's why these signs are much more than graphic oddities. They are a defense of clarity, a small visual architecture put at the service of the voice. And you? Do you always write the opening signs or only the closing ones? Leave us your opinion in the comment box. And that's all for today. If you liked this video, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe to this channel. Also, turn on the notification bell so you'll know when there's a new video. See you soon.